Good to go? Is missing somebody? Okay. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen of the media. Good morning, Trinidad and Tobago. Our listening and viewing audience live on social media. Welcome to the weekly press conference of the Leader of the Opposition. And with me this morning is Senator Dan Paul, and joining us very soon will be Senator Faris Alwari. This morning, the Leader of the Opposition, I just want to inform you that she has started her own tradition of meeting members of the public at Balizi House on scheduled days. And this morning she is scheduled to meet with members of the public at Balizi House. And in response to that, she has asked me to kindly represent her this morning at this morning's news conference to chair this morning's proceedings. So we wish her good luck meeting members of the public. My understanding is that on the last occasion where she met members of the public, it has been quite a very successful exercise. And this morning she has over 30 or 40 persons who have asked to meet with her. All right, so we wish her all the best in this exercise. Ladies and gentlemen, this morning in Trinidad and Tobago, we have so many issues to discuss that is occupying our minds at the national level. And if we were to engage all of the issues, it would perhaps take the entire day, and perhaps even more. So what we have decided to do is to identify those pressing issues that we believe are occupying the minds of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And that's the reason why Senator Dan Paul is here to talk about the budget and the planned date for the budget, which is October the 13th, and all of the issues surrounding the announcement of that date of the budget. Senator Faris Alwari will speak on the incident that occurred yesterday where a sitting minister of government is facing new charges before the criminal court and all of the issues associated with that. So over the last 48 hours, it has indeed been a traumatic one for Trinidad and Tobago. I would dare say it was like a UNC tornado that passed through Trinidad and Tobago and is giving the citizens of this country whiplash. And we just need to settle down. And if this is 6 months of UNC leadership, then it shows then that we have more tornadoes to come from a political perspective, because it is like Calamity Jane is leading the people of Trinidad and Tobago, and it will be calamity after calamity, tornadoes after tornadoes, instability after instability, because as Dr. Eric Williams once said, the alternative to the PNM is chaos and confusion. I want to start this morning by reminding you that when this government came into power, they have exercised their prerogative to make changes on state boards throughout the entire public sector. We have raised some issue with respect to the qualification of members of state boards, especially some of those state boards that can impact the quality of life of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. We have raised those issues time and time again because the state sector, if it is not managed well, it can have serious implications for governance in Trinidad and Tobago. So the persons and the citizens that we appoint to state boards is something that we, the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, must pay close attention. But under the state boards, you have executive leadership of these state institutions. And we have never seen in the history of this country post our independence the attack on the professional class and the professional sector in this country by any government. Boards are appointed mainly through the sitting government, and you don't have an interview process for the appointment of those boards by and large, so they are basically political appointees. But those persons who sit at the executive leadership of the organization, these organizations are professionals in themselves who have decided to come forward and offer their skills and their expertise in the state sector. For example, the Water and Sewage Authority. The last PNM government took pains to go out with a very transparent process to recruit the best minds locally and regionally to manage the Water and Sewage Authority, contrary to what would have occurred on previous occasions by previous political parties, where those persons who were appointed, they simply needed to have a party card or somehow aligned to the political party in power. And we have decided as a government, when the PNM was in government, that we needed to depoliticize the operations and the management of WASA and to recruit a group of persons who, based on their competencies, based on their qualifications, and based on their skills, wherever they are, regardless of whether they are politically aligned or not, that we will get the best managers to manage the authority, because part of the problem that we have identified in the Water and Sewage Authority, for example, just using that as an example, is management. You can invest how much you want in infrastructure upgrades, in the drilling of wells, in the installation of new water treatment plants and what have you, but you need competent managers to manage this infrastructure so that the people of Trinidad and Tobago can get a reliable supply of water. It took almost 2 to 3 years for the last PNM government to go through a very transparent process to get an executive management in place to manage the authority, where a CEO came from Barbados. And in under 1 month, the UNC government came into power and unceremoniously removed the executive leadership of that organization. Persons who would have made personal sacrifices, leaving their families behind, to come and offer themselves in public service as professionals, as being part of this professional class, had to be hounded out of office. And it bothers me deeply. It bothers me deeply because all of these so-called analysts who like to make themselves present and harassing the national psyche on a regular basis and writing columns to the newspapers, I am yet to hear or read a column in the national newspapers of Trinidad and Tobago where issue is being taken by this government for attacking the professional class, persons who have been duly appointed because of their skills, because of their competencies, because of their qualification, nothing to do with politics, and they are being hounded out of office. A country with 1.3 or 1.4 million people needs to protect its best minds, so that regardless of whatever the change might take place at the political level, there is continuity in governance, and the people of Trinidad and Tobago will not, their lives and their livelihood and the quality of life will not be impacted. But when a government can take aim, a political party, many of whom purchase their degrees or get it from paper mills, attacking the working class and attacking the professional class, it is a very dangerous precedent to set. It has happened in WASA. It has happened in the Trinidad and Tobago Electricity Commission. It has happened in FCB. It has happened in Heritage. It has happened recently in CAL. It has happened in TSTT, where professionals who applied for jobs work hard, make their sacrifices, and the government is not only removing political appointees, but they are attacking the professional class in Trinidad and Tobago. And I'm saying here today at this press conference that this will lead to instability in this country. Why should people who make personal sacrifices, our best minds, our best citizens, cutting across race and social class, who made sacrifices to educate themselves and offer themselves in public service in this country on a competitive basis, they are now being attacked and replaced by persons who did not go through a recruitment process and to occupy these positions, what is going to happen with some of our state enterprises that require our best minds, our competent minds, our qualified minds. It is one thing, ladies and gentlemen, it is one thing to change your board and put in competent party hacks, but it is a different matter when you have members of the executive management of state enterprises being attacked in this way. We have never seen it in the history of Trinidad and Tobago. I can give you an example. Anthony Isidore Smart, chairman of FCB, appointed under a UNC government between 2010 and 2015. The PNM government came into power in 2015, and Anthony Smart remained the chairman of FCB up until a couple weeks ago, where he was removed as chairman of FCB. I'll give you another example. Kelvin Ramsuk, a professional within the Trinidad and Tobago Electricity Commission, appointed between the period 2010 and 2015 by the UNC government, who would have spent all his years as a competent, qualified engineer within the Trinidad and Tobago Electricity Commission. When the PNM came into government, he remained as general manager of the Trinidad and Tobago Electricity Commission. And he remained as general manager and proceeded on his retirement up to the time when I served as Minister of Public Utilities in the government of Trinidad and Tobago. He served under the UNC, he served under the PNM. But today, you would have seen not too long ago, where again, the general manager of TNTech was removed from office. And I could also tell you that in many instances where some of these professionals are chased out of office, they are asked to sign non-disclosure contracts so that you, the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, will not understand the circumstances under which they were asked to exit their office. I am telling the people of Trinidad and Tobago today, it is one thing, and as bad as it is, to remove your best minds at the level of the boards in the state enterprises, but when you attack your professional class in the way that the professional class is being attacked today, it is going to impact the quality of governance in this country. It takes me to another point. A state of emergency was declared in this country not too long ago. And during this state of emergency, it is still in effect. We have heard that the prisons commissioner was sent on leave. During a state of emergency, it should concern every citizen that why during the state of emergency, the head of one of your key national security institutions was sent on leave. And whilst all of that was happening as though it was not bad, you are hearing of movements taking place at the executive level of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. And contrary to what others may say, I am saying it is a very serious matter when you are hearing of these changes taking place within key institutions of national security, where the Minister of Homeland Security, in a passing out parade, made open statements that you have infighting taking place in the management of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. His statement was clear that there have been infighting taking place at the level on the leadership of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. He tried to retract this statement some days after, but it was quite clear. And shortly after, we hear of movements again taking place in the leadership of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service within a state of emergency. In August, we woke up to the news that the commanding officer of the Trinidad and Tobago Regiment was sent on 365 days vacation leave. 365 days vacation leave. And shortly after, that decision was rescinded. And he was asked to take up duties again to lead the Trinidad and Tobago Regiment. We must ask ourselves what was the role of the Prime Minister as chair of the National Security Council on these matters? These serious and urgent matters of national security, where the head of your regiment in a state of emergency was immediately sent on leave, and 2 or 3 days after, that decision was cancelled and he was asked to take back up responsibility and leadership of the Trinidad and Tobago Regiment. All of these matters, ladies and gentlemen, are taking place during a state of emergency, a state of public emergency in Trinidad and Tobago. And I can tell you, when that decision was taken, it caused instability within the ranks of the Trinidad and Tobago Defence Force. Instability. And when you have instability within the ranks of the Trinidad and Tobago Defence Force in a state of emergency, it must concern every single citizen. Last night at 9 p.m. or 10 p.m., news came to hand that the Chief of Defence Staff was sent on leave immediately. The Chief of Defence Staff was sent on immediate leave. So you have attacks taking place at the professional class. You now have a level of instability taking place in the national security services of Trinidad and Tobago within a state of emergency, and the PNM opposition today is calling upon the Prime Minister as chair of the National Security Council to explain to the population what is taking place in national security in this country. What is taking place? And our understanding is that that decision that occurred last night, where the Chief of Defence Staff was sent on immediate leave by Her Excellency the President, is already contributing to instability within the ranks of the Trinidad and Tobago Defence Force. These are matters that must be treated sensitively. These are delicate issues of national security. And when you have the changing of leadership at the level of the Chief of Defence Staff within your military, there are certain military protocols that normally accompanies that, where there is a proper handing over parade is conducted, and then you have a smooth transition from one leadership to the other in true military style and military tradition. But today, under Calamity Jane and UNC Tornado, all of these things are now thrown out of the window, and it's instability left, right, and center in Trinidad and Tobago. Instability, lack of leadership, the destruction of proper protocols. These are matters that must concern not only us in the PNM, but if we are concerned about the stability of Trinidad and Tobago, these are matters that must be taken seriously. And today, we wake up again to new movements taking place at the Defence Force, where our CDS was sent on immediate leave without proper transition, without proper protocols, in the midst of a state of emergency. And whilst all of that is happening, members of the media, citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, 9 murders over the last 24 hours. 9 murders over the last 24 hours. And I made this statement not too long ago, a week ago, in Point Fortin, that if the government does not present a holistic proposal to tackle crime at its root causes in Trinidad and Tobago, then everything else is just fluff. Not too long ago, you would have heard from key spokesperson in national security that you have a 40% reduction in murder, close to 50%. When the PNM left office in April 28th, there was already a reduction in murder by 31% because of the state of emergency. But we warned the population that these gains are not substantial. They are fleeting. You are in the midst of a state of emergency. But after that, if you do not buckle down to do the hard work, then all of that will be immediately reversed. 1 week ago, the Minister of Homeland Security boasting, key spokespersons of national security boasting that there is a reduction in murder, and over the last 24 hours, 9 murders. Very serious matter. 9 murders in a state of emergency. Prison commissioner removed. Instability within the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service with movements of leaders and executive officers. The leaking of information on leave of senior members of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. And today, the commanding officer being sent on leave 2 days after was asked to come back and take up leadership of the Trinidad and Tobago Regiment. Last night, the Chief of Defense Staff sent on leave. It speaks volumes, and it shows that Trinidad and Tobago is in a very troubled position. The state of national security is in a very troubled place. And when you look at the quality of leadership coming from the government, you see a dark void that will not bring any soothing relief to this country. May God bless this country. May God bless Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you. I will ask Senator Faris Arari to come and offer some of his perspectives on some of the other developments that are taking place in this country.
Good morning, everyone. I've come to the podium next to follow on the track that has just been started. You were just given critical information for consumption, analysis, and journalistic input on national security. On that line, I've come to connect 3 issues for the population. 1, the controlled operations undercover law, which was brought into effect into the parliamentary sense by the Act most recently done, the FATF Compliance Bill. 2, the Anti-Corruption Investigation Bureau. 3, the SSA. National security and the management of crime and criminality are the cornerstone concerns of Trinidad and Tobago, amongst other things. But I noticed from the lack of reporting in relation to the FATF Compliance Bill as to one aspect that it was incumbent upon the opposition to raise a few issues for consideration and to ask a few questions and to point out a few things. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure that you're aware that we just did a FATF Compliance Bill. Most people thought that it was just generally a bunch of laws being amended to treat with an international compliance factor. That is true in large part because we have a 5th round mutual evaluation set for March of next year. And if we fail that 5th round mutual evaluation, the risk of Trinidad being negatively listed, grey listed, some people call it blacklisted, means that our banking sector transfers and positions will become extremely difficult. Our insurance will rise because our reinsurers are foreign, etc. So you're looking on top of a forex issue, a shrinking economy issue, a negative outlook for Trinidad and Tobago issue. You're looking at a serious compliance standard that has to be met, and if we do not pass it, we're in deep trouble. Inside of that law, the FATF Compliance Bill was 120 pages long. In that 120 pages, the Police Service Act was amended, the Anti-Terrorism Act was amended, the Financial Intelligence Unit Act of Trinidad and Tobago was amended, The Mutual Assistance in Criminal Matters Act was amended. Specifically, for the first time outside of the Firearms Act, we introduced something called undercover operations. For the first time, in the Firearms Act, there's a provision that allows for undercover operatives to go to work to allow a transshipment of firearms, and for the DPP to have a role in deciding whether those undercover agents will be prosecuted or not for breaches of the law. In other words, then, you put undercover people to commit crimes, to provide evidence in a court of law. You see it in the movies all the time. They rip open your shirt in a movie, the guy's wearing a wire, you see them making maneuvers to go to a judge to get a warrant. We see it in cinema, we see it in theater, correct? But for the first time in our country, the Police Service, the FIU, the Anti-Terrorism Act, and the Mutual Assistance in Criminal Matters Act have introduced undercover operations. That's not a thing that the government is to be blamed for. In fact, when I sat as Attorney General, I incepted the development of undercover operations laws in something called controlled operations. I instructed the Law Reform Commission to produce a paper, and we drafted a law. And in that law, we proposed that crime was to be managed by evidence, because everybody knows that you can't convict someone without evidence, and it must be in a court of law. So very often you see where people will be arrested, but it doesn't quite follow into conviction because witnesses disappear, etc., etc. So the PNM government developed a specific law called the Controlled Operations Law. The recent position, as we left it, was that if you're going to do an undercover operation, you had to go to a judge of the High Court and get a warrant, a judicial permission to go undercover. Specifically, if you met very stringent standards, which could be revoked if you broke the law, if you met very stringent standards, you get this warrant. And if you met the stringent standards, we treated with how the evidence would go to court, and we said, in those circumstances, with the warrant, you may have immunity from crimes against you or civil proceedings. We produced in the law reform paper examples in New Zealand, in Australia, and United Kingdom, even in the Caribbean. But in this FATF compliance bill, we saw criminal and civil immunity given without question. No judicial warrants. No room for the DPP to decide whether you've committed a crime or not. Blanket immunity. Statutory blanket immunity. That is something that has not featured in any newspaper report, in any analysis. I raised these arguments in the Senate myself. I'm very warned, and I want to be fair, that the Attorney General openly recognized the merit of what I was saying. I circulated to the independent senators, the government senators, and our senators, the law reform paper, the draft law that we prepared, with all its complexities of how it should be managed, as well as the cabinet note that the PNM government approved for that. And the Attorney General, in fairness to him, said that he would look at it, he recognized certain things were proper in those things, and that there were some things that were in the way of that happening right now. But ladies and gentlemen, let's draw an example. Could you imagine in our prison system where criminality exists? Because right now the maximum security prison is no longer secure, because people who have had difficulties in causing problems in the prisons have been moved to Tetron and to other places. We're in a state of emergency, and there are allegations that could easily, hypothetically, and sometimes in reality arise, that police officers may be engaged in criminal activities which are being now potentially masked as undercover operations. So are we just blanket approval, judicial scrutinies out, no warrant for these things? You just automatically give a law that says you have immunity. There is no other law of comparison in our country where you get absolute immunity for undercover operations. In a state of emergency, that becomes a very dangerous prospect. In areas of corruption in our prisons, police, and other services, that becomes a very dangerous prospect. But let's connect the dots to two other issues. I note that the Commissioner of Police is reported in the papers, as in the Newsday, for example, in an article entitled "COP has faith, trust in ACIB despite move to the Office of the Attorney General." Police Commissioner Alistair Guevara says he does not believe the relocation of the Anti-Corruption Investigation Bureau to the Office of the Attorney General 6 years after it was moved to prevent possible political interference will affect the hunt for corruption. Ladies and gentlemen, it may be that we don't have all the facts on this. In 2019, I took a cabinet note as Attorney General to the PNM government. And in that cabinet note, I presented, and it was approved, the rationale as to why the ACIB should be moved from under my management to the police exclusively. The reason was that any appearance of political interference must not feature in police investigations, even if it involves our own government and our own ministers. And our cabinet position, which came forward and which was approved, was very critical in managing our structures. I want to read for you part of that cabinet decision and where we have need for clarification, because let's not run away and say that it was actually moved. Here is an open call for particulars. Now, when we asked for the cabinet to move it, we referred to when it was first created. In 2002, the Anti-Corruption Investigation Bureau was created. It was an establishment with immediate effect of a corruption investigation bureau in the Ministry of the AG to deal in a holistic manner with questions of corruption, particularly in the public section. That bureau was to incorporate the functions of the anti-corruption squad of the Ministry of National Security, etc. It was charged with the responsibility for investigating Piarco Airport development project, Incogen and desalination plants. The Corruption Investigation Bureau was to coordinate and conduct in infractions of established procurement procedures, corrupt practices. They are to report to the Commissioner of Police and the DPP. The Bureau is to be provided with all resources to carry out its mandate, special expertise, legal advice staff. But here's the last bit, paragraph E, that the Bureau keep the Attorney General informed of the findings of its investigations. Our cabinet specifically rescinded paragraph E. We moved the reporting requirements to keep the Attorney General informed of police matters from the ACIB. Specifically, we noted in that note that, and I'll read it for you, Cabinet is advised that the proposed CIB, later called the ACIB, remains to date under the official portfolio of the AG. This is evidenced by Trinidad and Tobago Gazette, dated September 23, 2017, wherein the Ministry of the Attorney General and Legal Affairs has responsibility for the administration and business of the ACIB. So we recognize that we had gazetted what was in existence, which is the ACIB, which had to report to the Attorney General under paragraph E. And we then said at our consultations with the police and other positions, and with our work to deal with prosecutions of crimes, that we recommended to the Commissioner of Police that the ACIB be placed under the exclusive authority of the Commissioner of Police, to be managed alongside other specialist divisions of the TTPS, which have responsibility for investigating and prosecuting corruption, anti-money laundering, countering the financing of terrorism, proliferation financing. Following upon the aforementioned, the Commissioner of Police publicly announced his intention to cause the establishment of a specialist division to be known as the FID, the Financial Investigation Division, comprising Fraud Squad, Financial Investigation Branch, Cybercrime Unit, and the ACIB. And listen to these words. The Attorney General supports and recommends this initiative as apposite, meaning in line, to the best interests of the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. The Attorney General and Minister of Legal Affairs is of the firm opinion that the office of the Attorney General should be removed from any form of active, I've lost the page, should be removed from any form of active report by and or information from the ACIB and or even the perception of same as it relates to the findings of any of its investigations. It is for this reason, as stated at paragraph 5 here and above, that the Office of the Attorney General has confined itself under the present government to providing only administrative services, including information technology services, facilities management, and rental of office space to the ACIB. We then recited the Constitution, which gives the police particular powers, and we said, remove paragraph E. That's where you report to the AG and keep him informed. And we said this, the ACIB be placed under the exclusive authority of the Commissioner of Police to be established by him pursuant to Regulation 35.4 of the Police Service Regulations 2007, and such part of the administrative and operational unit in the service as may be approved by the Minister of National Security. So my question to the government is the gazetting of the ACIB to the Attorney General only for administrative purposes? Or is it, as I can only interpret the Commissioner of Police's statements, to be understood that paragraph E has been brought back to life? It is critical, in our respectful view, that there must be no change of the cabinet decision that the police, the ACIB, should never report criminal matters of the ACIB to an Attorney General. And therefore I leave that on the table for clarification by the government as to whether it is merely administrative support and whether they have in fact done the continuation of what was started. It's a critical point because bear in mind, I've just pointed out control operations. You have an example of a government minister being arrested last night. Is there to be prior warning of factors, etc.? We don't know, but we must keep our eyes on the general policy positions. The third point now is the SSA. Most people missed it. Nobody in the media reported that the gazetted responsibilities of the SSA, which normally reside to the Minister of National Security, have in fact gone to a division. The Minister of National Security under the Strategic Services Agency Act says that the minister means the minister to whom responsibility for national security is assigned. That is the law. The gazetting done by the Prime Minister in her major reshuffle, according to the Guardian and Express newspaper front pages, major reshuffle, saw the Minister of Homeland Security being left with two aspects, that is budget and administration, but the Attorney General has intelligence and strategy. What does that mean in the context of the law, where the law says the minister is the minister to whom the responsibility for national security exists. Is that a breach of the law? Now, even though the SSA is one of the key features in the Interception of Communication Act. So we have a law called the Interception of Communication Act, which allows the state to breach the law, because it says interception of communications is a breach of the law. But you can breach the law, you can intercept people's communications under the Interception of Communications Act if you get a warrant. Or in emergency situations, if you do it and you get a warrant after. There are two circumstances, Section 8 and Section 11 of the Interception of Communication Act. And you have to go to a judge, and you cannot use the evidence unless there's a judicial warrant. Section 8, Section 11, it provides for emergency circumstances. That's what we were suggesting for control operations, by the way. You get a warrant to participate in a crime. Interception of communication is a crime, unless you have a warrant. Under the Interception of Communications Act, it is the Chief of Defense, the head of the Army or military services, Coast Guard, etc., the CDS can intercept communications. Well, you heard the story with the CDS. He gone home. It is the Commissioner of Police as two of the figures in the SSA Act. And therefore, it is critical for us to understand this move of the SSA. This all relates to national security. This has to deal with the criminal justice system. But none of this has featured, obviously, fairly, because there have been so many other issues occupying attention. You've had tons of CEOs being sacked, forced to resign, non-disclosure agreements, massive state sackings, firings by the tens of thousands, and a budget that has been inexplicably delayed, which my colleague Senator Dan Paul will deal with in a short while. The last issue that I'll touch on is the matter of the arrest of Minister David Lee. You are innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. Everybody has the presumption of innocence. Mr. Lee has the presumption of innocence. I note the tendency of people to say, aha, etc. I wish Mr. Lee no harm, no jeopardy. I hope his case pans out. I want to be very fair that you are innocent until proven guilty. We expect lots of allegations against people from time to time. There is weaponization of many things, right? But in relation to the leader of the opposition's commentary, there's only one narrow point that I need to raise. I noticed that the leader of the opposition says that Mr. Lee was effectively let go and that charges have been relayed. Prime Minister, forgive me. I'm so sorry. Everybody's face was confused as to what I was saying. I apologize. The Honorable Prime Minister has said plainly that Mr. Lee is to be found, that we are to note that he was found effectively in jeopardy because he was acquitted. And she's noted that the charges have been relayed. I'd just like to explain that under the preliminary inquiries route, this is the old law, not the administration of justice. Administration of justice, we call it a JIPA, not the new law that we passed. Under the old PI Act, the Preliminary Inquiries Act, the Indictable Offences Preliminary Inquiries Act. Section 25 of that Act, beginning at subsection 5, 6, and 7, sets out that where the DPP believes a magistrate got something wrong, the DPP can request the documentation from the magistrate. The DPP can approach the High Court. The High Court, if it considers it appropriate, can decide that there is material to reverse the magistrate's decision. So there's no relaying of charges. The whole matter comes alive. It's very important to say this because the Administration of Justice, AJIPA, new law, does not allow for relaying of charges if you read it in a particular way. But the old Preliminary Inquiries Act where a matter began and still continues has a different approach. So we must be careful to understand that there is a nuance in the law in the old PI legislation, section 25. Five and 6 in particular, which tells us that there is a different way of treating with this. So those are the submissions that I ask you to bear in mind. In summary, there is a dangerous law in effect. That is civil and criminal immunity under the FIU Act, the Anti-Terrorism Act, the Mutual Assistance in Criminal Matters Act, and the Police Service Act, which gives complete civil and criminal unit immunity. We had recommended that that must only be done under strict circumstances with a judge saying that you can go and do that, so that it still allows the constitutional office of the DPP to act. Two, there is deep concern in relation to the need for clarification about the ACIB the ACIB was removed from reporting to the Attorney General's office by our government in 2019. Because there must be no perception of the political appointee of an Attorney General having access to criminal information, criminal matters, and prosecution. So the call is to the government to clarify whether it is just mere administrative support because they haven't fixed it yet in the budget to come. So eyes will be on it in the budget. And the last matter is the division of the SSA in the face of the SSA Act. The SSA Act says that the minister is the minister to whom responsibility for national security is assigned, and therefore there are questions to be asked inside of that as to whether it is lawful, can you bifurcate the responsibilities, etc., without having amended the law. There a deeper explanation. What is the problem? with Minister Alexander or with Minister Sturge. Both of whom have that split portfolio of national security. Managing the SSE. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Wage pension, public assistance grant. The bill is 5.4 $4.5 billion a month.
White House. Thank you, Chairman. Ms. Bondi, good morning.
Good morning.
What became of the $50,000 in cash that the FBI paid to Mr. Homan in a paper bag, evidently?
Senator, as Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche